In this video, we're going to have a look at resealing and servicing your APS shotgun CO2 shells. So these shells are CO2 filled using the 88 gram CO2 bulb and the smart charger nozzle. This nozzle here is used by pressing into the center here to refill. Now if I do so on this one here, I'll just use this hard surface, fill it up. You can hear this one is actually leaking. It's leaking out a little bit around the base here and a little bit around the main pin here. So that basically means the O-rings inside are either just dry of silicone oil or they've just had enough of life and they just can't hold the seal anymore. You got to remember there's 800 PSI in this, which means there's 800 PSI in here. So your O-rings have to be nice and lubricated to be able to seal. And then of course, if they're out of shape or if they've been damaged in any way, or another big factor is if you leave these charged with your CO2 for days, weeks, months, it will stress the O-ring to the extent where it may not ever seal again. So what we're going to do is take apart the lower half of the shell so that you can see internally of how it's layered, where the O-rings go and where to re-oil. Now we use a 2000 weight CST silicone oil, as you can see here down the bottom. This is the Aztech Innovations own oil, and it is specifically for this purpose. So nice and thick, it hangs around like a grease. It doesn't just vanish as soon as the gas pressure expels, which means you don't have to reservice a shell every time you use it. So we just gassed it up, so let's make sure there's zero pressure in there. Make sure that firing pin or the activator, the primer, is pushed through. There's zero pressure. Now these shells can be very, very, very tight to undo. This one here, as you can see, is not too tight, but others may be too tight to the extent where you may have to get a cloth and some multi-grips and holding around the base of the shell, and then use something like circlip pliers or pointy needle nose pliers and utilize the two holes on the bottom of the shell here. Use both sets of pliers to turn, obviously the opposite way, to remove the base of the shell. So poke them in the hole and turn the opposite way. Just normal lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. There is an O-ring around the base of the shell. So once we take it off, you can see the O-rings start to appear. So of course that, to be sealed, has to apply drag. So that is also an O-ring that you need to ensure stays lubricated. So this one's nicely lubed, so it came off nice and easily. But if that is dry, it's going to bind and make it very hard to take apart. So once we slide the main assembly of the shell off, you may end up leaving the O-ring and the washer behind. It may stay in the base, in the main body. If that's the case, you might just have to pop it out from the inside here. So as you can see, it is a little bit of a layer cake. So we have one factory O-ring at this end. They're a clear silicone type O-ring. As you can see, this one has definitely bit the dust. It's not even round. It's a squarish, oblong, oval shape, and it's very hard. So it really isn't going to have much chance at holding pressure. This one also fell off after. Then you have the big O-ring retainer plate. So that plate there holds the O-ring down into that far end. Then we have the big shim spacer that goes in the center, and at the other end it's exactly the same. You've got a retainer washer and then an O-ring that sits in the base. Now obviously that just pops off, exactly the same as the other end. So it is a mirror of each end. So it's pretty simple to get the order correct. So O-ring, washer, spacer, washer, O-ring. Simple as that. So when we change out our O-rings, most commonly it will be the lower O-ring that leaks. If the top O-ring leaks, then of course you can change it. Now, the reason why it is the lower O-ring that leaks the most is for this to fire, it obviously needs to have the O-rings to travel up and down the firing pin or the activator. The lower O-ring tends to be the one that leaks the most, but the top O-ring is one that can get deformed, because for it to fire, this O-ring has to drop all the way off its seat like that there. At this end, it has to drop off the seat for air to pass through it, for it to pass down the shell to fire. So if this isn't put back into place, then it can go out of shape. So all we're going to do is we're going to change the O-rings out to the 70 durometer nitrile rubber. Now, nitrile is very, very good at not deforming under pressure. It's also very good at staying lubricated. So using your silicone oil to keep it lubed, and it should stay round and in shape. So we'll pop off the top one, slide on a new one. It is a little bit tighter than that factory one, but as you can see, it travels up and down on there quite easily. And we'll do exactly the same on the other end. Pop a new one on there. Now, I haven't put any silicone oil on, so what we'll do is we'll make sure we lube those up nicely before it goes back in the lower half. So the lower half will sit on or in the base of the shell, and of course the top half, the top shell will come over the top. So with our silicone oil, we want to make sure both the main body of the shaft of the actuator or the firing pin, whatever you want to call it, is nicely lubed. Basically, we want the whole O-ring to be nicely lubed. Excess oil will just vanish. It will just explode away the first time you fire it anyway. But the benefit of that 2000 weight silicone oil is it leaves that film of thick oil behind, and it stays nicely lubricated for a fair while. So that's our layer cake back together. And then we screw on our cap, making sure, as I said before, that we keep this lower O-ring nicely sealed as well. Preferably the thread too, so that it doesn't bind up or have any issues sealing. I'm just going to do this off camera so I can get it nice and tight. My fingers are all slimy. Wind it down so it's all nice and tight, all the way down, sealed off. Now our firing pin should of course travel forward, and then of course it should be able to travel back down. So now it's resealed. Let's grab our pressurized canister. Where can you see me do it? Push in, hold it, no leaking, and then we'll test its power. We'll use the pliers here and watch it pop. Alright, so that held absolutely beautifully. There we go, one sealed shotgun shell. Of course, once it's gassed up, that will normally live on the top, and away we go. So that's the APS shotgun shells. It's actually very, very similar for the big Thor 40mm type shells. Take the top off, and then we have our normal fill port. At the bottom, we have our normal striker. So this one's already undone. I've already loosened it, so I can just show you the internal. Now we do have the Thor Reseal service kits here available. You'll see there's O-rings around the main body, top and bottom. And then we have exactly the same style of layer cake. Got the big spacer, you got the washer, which is the retainer, and then inside there you'll have the O-ring. If I can get them out. So you got the big O-ring in there, same at both ends, so it's exactly the same as the shotgun shell, just in the bigger format. Keep them layered up, keep them siliconed, make sure that that O-ring can ride up and down. The Reseal kits we have are the factory type O-rings. We don't have those in the nitrile because these ones being bigger, they just last a lot longer than the smaller shot shell ones. Keeping it all nicely lubed, screw it all back together, oh, wrong end, and away we go. So hope that helps with servicing your APS CO2 shotgun shells and the 40mm Thor launcher. Thank you guys.